At my mother's 65th birthday dinner, surrounded by extended family and childhood friends, my father stood up, pointed directly at me, and announced to the entire restaurant, "This guest no longer belongs here." The room went silent. 23. People stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. And when I discovered the real reason behind his public humiliation, I realized I'd been living a lie for 30 years. My name is Scarlett Whitmore, and until that night at Bellavista Restaurant in downtown Millbrook, I thought I had my life figured out. 30 years old. Marketing coordinator at Nexus Digital Solutions, living in a converted loft apartment on Maple Street with my rescue cat, Hemingway, and a collection of succulents that somehow managed to thrive despite my erratic watering schedule. I was the reliable daughter. The one who called every Sunday at exactly 2 p.m. because that's when Mom finished her weekly grocery shopping and had time to chat. The one who remembered every birthday, anniversary, and holiday with thoughtfully chosen gifts that showed I'd been paying attention. The one who showed up to every family gathering with a genuine smile and whatever dish I'd been assigned to bring. For 3 decades, I'd been playing the role of the good daughter perfectly. Too perfectly, as it turned out. My parents, Robert and Vivian Whitmore, lived in the same colonial house on Elmwood Drive where I'd grown up. Dad worked as a senior accountant at Hartwell and Associates for 37 years before retiring last spring. Mom had been an elementary school teacher until she decided to stay home when I was born, then returned to substitute teaching when I started high school. They were the kind of people who mowed their lawn every Saturday, attended St. Mark's Episcopal Church every Sunday, and never forgot to send thank you notes. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Middle-class comfortable, the kind of family that took one vacation a year. Usually to the same cabin at Lake Serenity, where Dad would fish, while Mom read romance novels on the dock and I built elaborate sandcastles that would be gone by morning. I thought we were normal. Happy, even. Sure, we had our quirks and occasional tensions like any family, but nothing that seemed abnormal or unhealthy. Dad could be a little controlling about schedules and organization. And Mom sometimes got passive-aggressive when she felt overlooked, but who didn't have family quirks? My childhood had been stable, predictable, safe. Piano lessons on Tuesdays, soccer practice on Thursdays, family movie nights on Fridays. I got good grades, had a small circle of close friends, and never gave my parents any serious trouble. I was the daughter who came home by curfew, called when I said I would, and never experimented with anything more dangerous than staying up past bedtime to finish a book, even as an adult. I'd maintained that same reliable, responsible image. I lived 20 minutes away from my parents, close enough to help with anything they needed but far enough to have my own independence. I had a steady job that I was genuinely good at, creating social media campaigns and managing digital marketing strategies for small businesses. It wasn't my dream career. I'd originally wanted to be a journalist, but it paid well and gave me flexibility. My dating life was adequate. I'd had a few long-term relationships that fizzled out amicably, usually because of timing or career priorities rather than any dramatic incompatibilities. My last serious relationship had been with Marcus Chen, a software developer I'd met through work. We dated for 2 years before mutually deciding we were better as friends. My parents had liked him, which should have been a good sign but somehow felt like a red flag I couldn't quite articulate. I had a small but solid group of friends, Jenna from college who now worked as a physical therapist, my coworker David who shared my obsession with true crime podcasts, and my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, who somehow always knew when I needed someone to talk to. My life wasn't exciting, but it was mine, and I was content with it. Mom's 65th birthday had been on the calendar for months. She'd been dropping hints since January about wanting to try Bellavista, the new upscale Italian restaurant that had opened in the historic district downtown. The kind of place where they make their pasta fresh daily and the wine list has bottles that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. It looks so elegant, she'd said, showing me pictures on her phone during one of our Sunday calls. Your father thinks it's too fancy, but I think for a milestone birthday, I'd immediately volunteered to make the reservation and organize the whole thing. That's what I did. I organized things. I was good at it, and I genuinely enjoyed making other people happy. Plus, Mom had been dropping increasingly less subtle hints that she felt her birthdays had become just another day in recent years. The guest list had grown organically over several weeks. It started with just immediate family: Mom, Dad, and me. Then Mom mentioned it might be nice to include Dad's brother Marcus and his wife Patricia, who lived about an hour away in Riverside. Then she thought about her sister Carmen, who would feel left out if she wasn't invited. Before we knew it, we had 23 people confirmed: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and Mrs. Henderson from next door, who'd been Mom's best friend since they'd met at a PTA meeting 25 years ago. I'd called Bellavista 6 weeks in advance to reserve their private dining room. The hostess, Sophia, had been incredibly helpful, walking me through menu options for large groups and helping me coordinate dietary restrictions. Uncle Marcus was diabetic. Cousin Riley was vegetarian, and Aunt Carmen had recently gone gluten-free after reading an article that convinced her wheat was the root of all modern health problems. I'd created a shared document with all the details: arrival time 6 p.m. sharp, Dad's preference, parking information the restaurant validated. But the lot only held 20 cars. Gift protocol: I'd suggested everyone contribute to a group gift rather than bringing individual presents, and even conversation topics to avoid politics, Uncle Marcus's recent divorce, and Cousin Jessica's ongoing struggles with infertility. Maybe that should have been my first clue that something was wrong, the fact that I felt the need to script family conversations to avoid conflict. But at the time, it just seemed like good event planning. I'd spent considerable time choosing my outfit: a navy blue wrap dress that Mom had complimented at Christmas, paired with the pearl earrings she'd given me for my college graduation. I'd gotten my hair done that afternoon at Salon Luxe, opting for a simple blowout that would look polished but not like I was trying too hard. I even brought the wine Dad had specifically requested, a bottle of Chianti Classico from 2018 that had cost me $85 and required a special trip to the wine shop on the other side of town. He'd mentioned it months ago, saying he'd read about it in Wine Spectator and wanted to try it for a special occasion. Everything had been planned perfectly. I'd confirmed the reservation twice, picked up Mom's gift, a silk scarf from her favorite boutique, plus a contribution to the group gift, a weekend getaway to a spa in the mountains, and even arrived 15 minutes early to make sure the private dining room was set up correctly. Bellavista was everything Mom had hoped it would be. The building dated back to the 1890s and had been lovingly restored, with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and those warm Edison bulb fixtures that made everyone look like they were starring in a romantic movie. The private dining room was in the back, separated from the main restaurant by frosted glass doors that muffled the sounds of other diners. The table was set for 23 with crisp white linens, real cloth napkins, and multiple sets of silverware that suggested we were in for a proper multi-course experience. Fresh flowers, white roses, and eucalyptus served as centerpieces, and someone had already opened several bottles of wine to let them breathe. I'd arrived at 5:45 p.m. wanting to check that everything was perfect before the guests started arriving. Sophia, the hostess, assured me that everything was ready and that their chef, Antonio, was excited to prepare his signature dishes for such a large group. The guests began arriving promptly at 6 p.m. Uncle Marcus and Aunt Patricia were first, followed closely by Mom's sister Carmen and her husband Luis. Then came the wave of cousins: Jessica with her husband Tom, Riley with her girlfriend Sam, Tyler flying solo after his recent breakup, and the younger cousins Emma, Nathan, and little Sophie, who was only 8 but had been included because she was Carmen's granddaughter and would feel left out otherwise. Family friends filled out the rest of the group: the Hendersons from next door, the Kowalskis from Dad's work, and the Chengs, no relation to my ex-boyfriend Marcus, who had been family friends since before I was born. Each arrival brought hugs, compliments on the restaurant choice, and small talk about traffic, parking, and how lovely Mom looked. And Mom did look lovely. She was wearing the emerald green dress Dad had bought her for their anniversary last year, paired with the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She'd had her hair done that morning at the same salon where I'd gotten my blowout. And she was practically glowing with happiness. She kept touching the pearl necklace, a gesture I recognized from childhood. She did it when she was nervous or excited or trying to process strong emotions. Tonight, it seemed to be pure joy. She was radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years, maybe decades. Dad was Dad. He greeted everyone warmly but efficiently, making sure everyone found their seats and had drinks. He'd always been the logistics person at family gatherings, the one who coordinated carpools, made sure elderly relatives had rides home, and discreetly picked up checks before anyone could argue about splitting them. He seemed normal. That evening, maybe a little more quiet than usual, but Dad had never been the type to dominate conversations. He preferred to listen, to observe, to notice things other people missed. I'd inherited that trait from him, along with his tendency to organize everything and his inability to truly relax until all the details were handled. The first hour unfolded exactly as I'd expected. We'd ordered appetizers for the table, bruschetta, antipasto platters, and something called arancini that the server described as fried risotto balls with truffle oil. The conversation flowed naturally between catching up on family news, complimenting the restaurant, and the kind of gentle reminiscing that happens at milestone birthday celebrations. Uncle Marcus told his story about the time he and Dad had gotten lost driving to a baseball game in 1987 and ended up in 3 different states before finding the stadium. We'd all heard it before, but it was funny enough to warrant the retelling, especially when Dad interjected with corrections to Marcus's increasingly embellished version. Cousin Jessica showed pictures of her new baby, little Olivia, who'd been born just 2 months earlier. The photos were passed around the table with the appropriate cooing and comments about who she looked like. Aunt Patricia insisted she had Dad's eyes, while Carmen was convinced she had the family chin. Riley and her girlfriend Sam talked about their upcoming wedding, scheduled for next summer. They'd been together for 5 years and had finally decided to make it official. Mom was particularly excited about this because she'd always loved Riley and was thrilled to officially welcome Sam into the family. Even Aunt Carmen was behaving herself, limiting her complaints to just her hip replacement and her neighbor's dog that barked at 6 a.m. every morning. She'd brought printed copies of articles about the benefits of turmeric supplements and gluten-free living, but she kept them in her purse instead of distributing them like pamphlets, which showed remarkable restraint. I sat between Mom and Tyler, picking at the antipasto platter and half listening to conversations about neighbors I barely remembered and TV shows I didn't watch. The Hendersons were discussing some drama involving the Homeowners Association and holiday decorations. The Kowalskis were planning a cruise to Alaska. Little Sophie was quietly coloring in a book her grandmother had brought to keep her occupied. I remember thinking that the biggest challenge of the evening would be avoiding Aunt Carmen's inevitable questions about my dating life and when I was going to settle down and give your mother some grandchildren. I had my standard deflection ready. I'm focusing on my career right now, but who knows what the future holds. It was vague enough to seem hopeful without committing to any timeline. Mom seemed genuinely happy. Really, truly happy in a way that went beyond just enjoying a nice dinner. She kept laughing at Uncle Marcus's jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. She was asking thoughtful questions about everyone's lives and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. She complimented the food, the wine, the restaurant, and thanked me at least 3 times for organizing everything. "This is perfect, sweetheart," she said, squeezing my hand during a lull in conversation. "Absolutely perfect. I can't remember the last time I felt so celebrated." That comment stuck with me, though I didn't think much of it at the time. When was the last time she'd felt celebrated? Dad was good about remembering birthdays and anniversaries, but he wasn't particularly demonstrative. Their relationship had always seemed solid but not particularly romantic or exciting. Comfortable, I guess, the kind of marriage where they functioned well as a team but didn't seem to have much passion left. But tonight, Dad seemed different too. More attentive to Mom, more present in the conversations. He'd complimented her dress when she'd walked into the restaurant, and I'd seen him touch her shoulder affectionately several times during dinner. Maybe they were going through a second honeymoon phase. I thought. It happens sometimes with couples. After retirement, we'd ordered our entrees about 45 minutes into the dinner. I'd chosen the chicken parmesan because it seemed like a safe option that wouldn't be too messy to eat while making conversation. Mom had ordered the lobster ravioli. Something she never would have chosen if she were paying for it herself. Dad had gone with the osso buco, which the server had described in detail, including something about the bone marrow and wine reduction that had made my mouth water. The food was exceptional, the kind of meal that makes you understand why people are willing to pay premium prices for a dining experience. My chicken was perfectly seasoned and tender. The sauce was rich without being heavy, and the pasta was clearly made fresh that day. Conversation continued to flow naturally. We talked about Tyler's new job at a marketing firm in the city, Emma's acceptance to her first-choice college, and Nathan's recent promotion to assistant manager at the electronics store where he'd been working since high school. Normal family updates, the kind of conversation that happens when people who genuinely care about each other get together to celebrate. I was cutting into my chicken, listening to Mrs. Henderson tell a story about her grandson's soccer team. When I noticed Dad had gone quiet, not unusual, he often retreated into observation mode during large group conversations, but there was something different about his silence tonight. He wasn't just listening, he was watching, studying faces, expressions, body language. When I glanced at him, he was looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, not sad, but intense, focused. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle and I was a crucial piece. "Everything okay, Dad?" I asked quietly, not wanting to interrupt Mrs. Henderson's story. He nodded but didn't look away. "Just thinking about some things," he said. "Good things, I hope," I replied with a smile. He didn't answer immediately, just continued looking at me with that same intense, unreadable expression. Then he said, "We'll see." It was an odd response, but before I could ask what he meant, Uncle Marcus had launched into another story and the moment passed. Dad turned his attention back to his dinner, and I convinced myself I'd imagined the strange exchange. I was 3/4 of the way through my chicken parmesan when Dad stood up. My first thought was that he was going to refill water glasses, or get more bread from the basket near the appetizer station. He'd been doing that throughout the evening, playing host even though we were at a restaurant. But instead of moving toward the water pitcher or bread basket, he just stood there, tall, still, commanding attention without saying a word. The conversations around the table gradually died down as people noticed him standing. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice clear and carrying easily across the now quiet room. Mom looked up at him with curious, affectionate eyes. She was still glowing from the evening's celebration, clearly expecting some kind of toast or sweet tribute, maybe a speech about how much this birthday meant to him, or how grateful he was to have everyone there. Uncle Marcus set down his wine glass. Cousin Jessica paused mid-sentence in whatever she'd been saying to Tom. Even little Sophie looked up from her coloring book. Dad's face was serious, but not sad. Not angry either, just resolute. Like he'd been thinking about this moment for a very long time and had finally decided to act. The room was completely silent now. 23 people waiting to hear what Robert Whitmore had to say on his wife's 65th birthday. He turned toward me, and for just a second, I thought he was going to give some kind of toast about how proud he was of me for organizing the evening. Maybe something about how I'd always been the one to bring the family together, or how grateful he was to have such a thoughtful daughter. Instead, he raised his arm and pointed directly at me. "This guest," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "no longer belongs here." The words hit like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest tighten, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. The fork slipped from my hand and clinked against my plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. 23 faces turned toward me, some confused, some shocked, some suddenly very interested in studying their pasta. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Cousin Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair next to me. Mrs. Henderson looked like she'd just witnessed a car accident. Dad, I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller and more confused than I intended. He didn't look away, didn't soften his expression. Didn't show any sign that he regretted what he'd just said. I think you know why, Scarlett. But I didn't. I had absolutely no idea why. I sat there, fork forgotten, trying to process what had just happened while the entire room watched and waited for what? An explanation, an apology. A dramatic confession, a tearful exit. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I done something wrong, forgotten something important, said something offensive without realizing it, failed to meet some expectation I didn't even know existed? I couldn't think of anything. Nothing that would warrant this kind of public humiliation. Nothing that would make my own father point at me like I was a stranger who had crashed a private party. Robert, Mom said quietly, her voice tight with confusion and embarrassment. What are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago. He replied, still looking directly at me. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding or a poorly timed joke or some kind of birthday surprise gone wrong. This was planned, deliberate. He'd waited for this moment, Mom's birthday, surrounded by everyone we knew, to humiliate me as publicly as possible, and I had absolutely no idea why. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable. With each passing second, I could hear the muffled sounds of other diners in the main restaurant, the clink of silverware, the low murmur of normal conversations happening at normal tables where fathers weren't publicly disowning their daughters for mysterious reasons. Dad, I said again, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't understand. What are you talking about? He finally looked away from me, his gaze sweeping around the table to take in all the shocked, confused faces. I think that's enough celebration for tonight, he said. Vivian, are you ready to go? Mom was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Robert, we haven't even had dessert, and you haven't explained. There's nothing to explain, he said, pulling out his wallet. At least, nothing that needs to be explained here. He placed several $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the entire dinner for all 23 people. Then he looked at me one more time. Scarlett, I think it's best if you leave first. Give us a few minutes. The humiliation was complete. Not only had he publicly declared that I didn't belong there, but now he was asking me to leave my own mother's birthday dinner, a dinner I had organized, planned, and paid for the private room to host. I sat there for a moment longer, hoping someone would speak up, would demand an explanation, would refuse to let this bizarre scene continue. But everyone just stared at me, at Dad, at their plates, at anything except the growing catastrophe in the middle of the room. Finally, I stood up on shaking legs, my napkin falling to the floor. Happy birthday, Mom, I said quietly, though my voice cracked on the words. She looked like she wanted to say something, but Dad's hand was on her shoulder now, and whatever she saw in his expression stopped her. I walked out of that restaurant with as much dignity as I could muster, which wasn't much. Behind me, I could hear the gradual resumption of conversation, though it was stilted and uncomfortable. I didn't look back. It wasn't until I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking too much to put the key in the ignition, that I realized the most terrifying part of the entire experience. I genuinely had no idea what I'd done wrong. And somehow, that felt like the most damning evidence of all. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel while my hands finally stopped shaking enough to start the engine. The parking lot of Bellavista was still full. Everyone else was apparently staying for dessert and coffee, pretending that what had just happened was somehow normal. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler, "Are you okay?" That was insane. Then another from Jenna, who wasn't even at the dinner. "Your mom just called me crying. What happened?" I turned off my phone without responding. I couldn't explain what had happened because I didn't understand it myself. Instead of driving home to my empty apartment where I'd just replay the scene over and over, I found myself driving to Riverside Park. It was the place I'd always gone as a teenager when I needed to think, a small lake surrounded by walking trails where Dad had taught me to fish when I was 8. I parked near the boat launch and walked to our old fishing spot. The bench was still there, weathered but sturdy, overlooking the water where ducks paddled lazily despite the evening chill. This was where Dad and I had our best conversations. When I was growing up, where he'd taught me about patience, about reading people, about the importance of thinking before acting. Always trust your instincts, Scarlett. He told me once when I was 16 and worried about a friend who was making bad choices. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't ignore that feeling just because you can't explain it. Sitting there now, I realized my instincts had been trying to tell me something for months, maybe years. I'd just been too invested in being the perfect daughter to listen. The excessive gratitude whenever I helped with something small, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, the strange comments from relatives about how different I was from the rest of the family. Mom's increasing nervousness during our Sunday phone calls. Like she was walking on eggshells. And the weird financial questions. 6 months ago, Dad had asked me about my job, my salary, my benefits package, not in a normal parental interest way, but like he was conducting an audit. When I'd asked why he wanted to know, he'd said he was just curious about how young people manage their finances these days. Last month, Mom had made an odd comment about my apartment. It must be nice to have your own space, no obligations to anyone else, she'd said. At the time, I'd thought she was just feeling empty nest syndrome. Now it felt loaded with meaning. I couldn't decode. 3 weeks ago, at Uncle Marcus's birthday barbecue, Aunt Carmen had pulled me aside and said, "I hope you know how much your parents appreciate everything you do for them." When I'd looked confused, I didn't do anything special for them. She'd gotten flustered and changed the subject. All these moments that had felt slightly off, slightly wrong, but I'd dismissed them because I trusted my parents, because I believed in our family, because I thought being the reliable daughter meant something. My phone rang. Mom's ringtone. I stared at it until it went to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Sweetheart, please call me back. I don't know what happened tonight. Your father won't explain anything, and I'm so confused and embarrassed. Please, I need to talk to you." She sounded genuinely distraught, which only made everything more confusing. If she didn't know what was happening either, then what was this about? I drove home slowly, taking side streets to avoid the main roads where I might pass other dinner guests heading home. My apartment felt different when I walked in, a smaller, lonelier. Like even Hemingway was judging me for whatever crime I'd apparently committed. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my couch, staring at my phone. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but nobody seemed to have answers. The last text was from Dad, sent just 10 minutes ago. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone." No explanation. No apology. Just a command, like I was an employee being called into a disciplinary meeting. I set the phone aside and tried to think logically. What could I have done that was serious enough to warrant public humiliation but not serious enough for anyone else to know about it? What secret was I supposedly keeping that even Mom didn't know? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't really about me at all. This was about something else. Something bigger, and I was just the convenient target. Dad's behavior tonight hadn't been emotional or impulsive. It had been calculated, deliberate, performed. Like he'd been planning it for weeks. Which meant whatever happened tomorrow at 2 p.m. wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an ambush. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could trust the man who'd taught me to trust my instincts.